Greetings and welcome to the Shibori Saga. In this series of videos, I will be showing you how to make your very own Shibori jewelry using the famous silk ribbon. And I'm going to be breaking up this series into more manageable chunks and smaller pieces just to kind of really get down and detailed into the breakdown of the steps. I have a feeling that a lot of the reason why this technique is so intimidating to people is because it's so freeform. There's practically no rules whatsoever in how to do this, so I kind of hope to kind of ease people into it and give somebody some form of structure and to not be afraid to just try it out. In this segment, I'm going to go over the materials you should have, as well as getting started, and making your piece and putting your ribbon onto your backings. So, let's get started. Okay, first and foremost, you will need your silk ribbon. I've got a link down below as to places that you can purchase this stuff. Like I said, for those of you who might have seen my haul video, this stuff is about $8 for 18 inches, or about 15 bucks a yard. That is about the average price. If anybody knows of any other locations to purchase them, feel free to comment down below. This stuff is very, very susceptible to oils and dirt, so be sure to keep your ribbon protected in a bag at all times. And this is what it looks like when you pull it out. It starts off at about 1 inch, and the pleats can make it stretch out to about 4 inches. It's got a bit of a sheen to it, and a very lovely texture that makes it interesting and moldable. We will be stitching our piece on top of a stiff backing. A popular brand of this stuff is called Lacey's Stiff Stuff, but what I'm using is actually Pellon 70, which I dropped down to my local Joann's and grabbed a huge lot of it for about $6 a yard. It's the Pellon 70 weight, very stiff and rigid, and great for needles to get through. The disadvantage of this stuff is that this stuff is polyester, so it's not as easy to dye. If that is something you're interested to go and do, I'll probably be doing a video later on in the future about that. But for what you can see, if you can see this really closely, there are gaps in between my beads where it's bright white, where the interfacing is, and some people might not be bothered by that, some people might find that kind of unappealing, so Lacey's Stiff Stuff, I know you can dye in a variety of techniques, and I can go over that in the future. After that, you will be needing some sort of backing. Most everybody uses micro suede because it doesn't fray after you cut it, but I got this piece of upholstery fabric. It's kind of suede-ish. It frays a little bit, but in this piece it hasn't really caused me much problems, so I don't mind using it. And I'm probably going to go over how to do it with regular fabric, because I have a feeling there's a few tips and tricks that I can do to use a regular fabric backing and something a little bit more decorative. But this basically serves the purpose of covering the stitches in the back, so you can be as messy as you want while you're doing it. And then we go a bit into the fun stuff. You'll need an assortment of seed beads, or delica beads. Now, the difference between delicas and seed beads is that seed beads are round-shaped, and they're not necessarily as uniformly cut, so you have a lot of uneven sizes at times, but basically it's the shape. Because with delicas, these are cylindrical shaped, and they're cut much more evenly through a computer. And yeah. The difference is between using these is depending on what you want for looks. For this one, I've got rounds in the border. Let's see if we can, there we go. The rounds in the border, you can kind of see what kind of a border shape that makes. And the delicas in the back, which has a much more uniform line forming the border. You can use seed beads on the border too, it just is a matter of your preference. You can even use larger sizes like size 8 or size 6 even, but I would probably not recommend using anything lower like size 15, just because the size of the needle that we're going to use for this project is kind of hard to get through 15s in the first place, and if you pop it, you're going to pop a bead in the middle of the project. You'll have not a fun time. At all. Moving on, we will need a bail or earring findings, just to kind of anchor the piece down, and kind of give it a more of a finished look. You don't have to, you can totally make your own bail, which is what I've got on this one for a pendant. I just did a little bit of a herringbone stitch, and I turned it into a bail. But if you wanted a more of a finished look, you can feel free to sew on a lovely metal piece or finding. And then you will need an assortment of beads and findings. Now, this is where it gets pretty fun. You have a lot of available options to you. You can use literally any bead shape that you have, and you don't need a lot of them. You can just use your favorite bead shapes, like I've got some 3mm pearls from Swarovski. I favor Swarovskis because of all the shine and the sparkle, so I tend to use those the most, but I've got like the bicones here, I've got a butterfly stuck in there, and I think a star is in there. Yep, there's a little bitty star in there. It kind of depends on what you want to be the focal of your project. I've got some Dragonscales, some check press Dragonscales to use, and some freshwater pearls. Literally anything. If you have like a few beads left over in your bead stash that you have no idea what you want to do with, this is the perfect project for that. Also, I have some rivolis. You can also put some peyote bezeled rivolis right on top of your piece, to add a larger sparkle to it. Basically, whatever you want to put in there, go ahead and put it in here. Then you will be needing a certain thread, whatever you like to use. Nylon is actually nice for this project, and I know I hate Nymo all the time, but I'm going to say this now. Since Nymo comes in a large variety of colors, you can easily match a thread to your work, and once the piece is finished, it doesn't really get a lot of hard wearing, because it just kind of stays in place and doesn't really move. So, nylon is probably a good start to work with on your project. You can also use Fireline. I've seen some people use Fireline as well, but I'd probably use a lower weight, just so that you can get it through beads multiple times. And yeah. Moving on to your tools, you will be needing a basic pair of scissors, something fairly sharp, in order to cut through the interfacing in nice chunks so you're not left with a lot of choppy edges. A pencil or a marker. This is what we're going to use to draw the shape of the pendant, the final pendant that you want. You also need either like an index card or some heavy cardstock or cardboard. This is what we're basically going to use to draw the pattern on top of it before we draw the pattern onto the fabric. Reason being is you really can't erase lines on top of interfacing. It kind of leaves these gross, smudgy things that really makes your lines hard to see. So, and besides, once you make a pattern, they're also reusable. So if you like a shape, and you can keep using that shape, and have lots of fun. You will also be needing a needle, obviously. I recommend some heavy, stiffer needles to go through the fabric a bit easier. Beading needles are okay to do it, but I've found that once I've glued on the backing to the piece, that it's a little hard for beading needles to get through the glue. So something rigid like these Beadsmith Sharps are okay. I'm not a fan of these needles because they're so short, and I have really, really big hands, so my hand cramps a lot quicker. Then you'll need some pins. I've got these quilting T-pins that I have left over from my chainmail kit. But you basically use these to tack down where you want your ribbon to go. Because this thing is very fluid, and you will need to basically keep the shape in order before you stitch it down. Sewing pins also work pretty well. These ones are a little thicker, and you might not want to use them because of the, it might break bigger holes into the silk than what you want. but this is what I have, so I'm going to use those. Also, something that's not required, but very, very helpful, some sort of tray that's divisible so that you can separate your beads into, and easily access them so that without having them spill everywhere and keeping them organized. What's really great for this is cheap $1.50 painter's palettes that have the little cup dishes. Those kind of works. Those work fantastically because they're up and you don't have to like dig. But I have a pillbox, so that's what I'm going to be using for my organization. And finally, some glue or adhesive. I will be using E6000, which is kind of the standard. I'm not completely happy with it because to me it has the strength of hot glue. Maybe I'm not using it right, but whatever. It's everybody's pretty much go-to, and everybody else swears by it, so it's probably me doing something wrong. But anyway, you use this to glue the final embroidery piece on top of the fabric backing. And you also use this to attach things that don't have holes, like metal castings or findings, even some of the rivolis. There's a way to glue that on. And use basically this to keep things in place. That's it for materials. Let's get moving on to starting your own piece. Alrighty, so here we have our cardstock, and the first thing we want to do is draw out what kind of shape we want to do. You can do teardrops, you can do ovals, you can do what have you. Nothing with a lot of points to it. We want more rounded shapes than anything. Nothing like a star shape. I mean, you could do it. Because if you look online, there are a lot of shapes that don't have a lot of ribbon on them, and that most of the embroidery is on the shape itself. And I'll have a lot of pictures to show you what I mean. I'll post some down below. For this time, I think I'm going to go with just a basic teardrop shape. One with 2 points, so I guess it's an eyeball shape. So, just draw on what you want. And then just bear in mind the size of the pendant that you want to make. I am happy with that shape, so I'm going to cut it out. And the advantage of these is if you're using something that's more rigid, like thick cardboard or something, you can use these in the future if you end up liking the shape. And just stashing them somewhere. So that's my shape. That's what I'm going to be using. So you basically just paste it on top of your fabric. Now this one's a matter of preference when it comes to working with this. You can either cut out the shape immediately, or you can just trace on the shape and then just bead as you go and cut it when you're done with it. I haven't really seen too many advantages between either technique, so yeah, I just basically trace out the shape and then bead on top of the whole pattern. With the interfacing, you might have to rub it down a few times in order to get the shape even. And there you're left with your pattern. You can kind of fix the lines to something that's more even. Or even if you have stencil templates, that would help out really nicely too. And there you have it. And then we're going to move on to the actual designing of the piece. So when you are building this, you kind of want to consider a couple of things. The ends of the ribbon are going to need to be covered up with beads. So most people, what they will do is they will basically leave a bit of a border and draw lines to basically where they want to put the findings and the bail, and basically leave the ribbon where they are at. So we kind of measure out our ribbon. Now with this, a little goes a long way, because it doesn't matter how small it gets up here, it'll stretch. And depending on what you want the look to be, depends on how much you should cut away. Because if you want it to be more poofier and elevated, you'll want to cut just a little bit longer than the lines that you have here. If you want to just basically have a more flat piece and just basically weave the curves in yourself, cut pretty close to the lines. So, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And really, a little goes a long way. This strand is 18 inches, and I only needed about 1.5 inches for this project. So, you have enough in that stash for quite a bit of pendants. So, once we've cut that out, you might want to even the ends a bit, because we're going to basically cinch the top, and it makes the stitching a little easier if everything is even, and all the pleats are basically ending in the same part. So basically just trim it up a little bit, and then we'll get on to the stitching part. Okay, so I've got my needle threaded with a series of overhand knots at the end, leaving a tiny bit of a tail. You can actually cut it pretty short, because what we're going to do is fix it up later. And we're going to take the top shinier side of the piece, and we're going to kind of pinch it together to match the points of the pendant. Now, if you had a piece, like say you made a triangle, basically you will have a point at one end, and then you will sew it open at the other end to form that kind of a fan shape. But since I have 2 points in this piece, I'm just going to basically cinch it so that they work together, like that. So I'm basically going to go under my work, and I'm going to stick my needle towards the end of the line where I marked, and pull it all the way through. Then I'm going to take my silk, and I'm going to pass my needle through all of the pleats so that everything kind of accordions and pinches together. Like that. And I'm going to pull it all the way down. Then I'm going to pass through the other end of my line. And it's like that. Now, in order to secure it in place, I'm just going to go back through once more. Take it through the back to the border of my line, and then pass through all of the pleats once more. Now, the great thing about this piece is that if you make a mistake, you can easily fix it by covering everything up. So that's always a bonus. Okay. Pull that tight. And then down once again. Then you can kind of arrange your ribbon a little bit. Now, before we work on attaching the other end down, what we might want to do is play around with the ribbon just to see where we want it to lay and where we want to push the pleats around. This step is entirely up to you. We can make it so that the ribbon reaches the entire border, or that we have some sort of a curvy gap going on so that we can put more beads in the blank sections. But I think for this one, I'm going to just fill everything out as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is take my pins and just kind of poke it down and tack it where I want it to stay. And kind of keep in mind the edges of the silk. And you kind of want to make it so that a fold is facing downward so that the edges are nice and even. You have the little rougher edges that you can cover with beads. I can show you what I mean right there. See how that one is a cut end? And it's kind of fluffy and rough. But with this side I've got a pleat coming down, so it's nice and smooth. Now, basically, we're going to be moving our way down to the other end, so anywhere that you have a pin, we're going to move and make a little teeny tiny stitch in order to keep the shape where we want it. This is also where you'd want a thread that matches the silk pretty well, because the thread will show at this point. But, for right now, I just have my black. Alright, so from right here, since I'm on this corner, I'm going to move over here to my first pin and put a very teeny tiny stitch. Just literally jump right to the edge where I want to be and put a minuscule stitch to anchor it in place. Okay. Move that pin out, and I'm going to do it again. And then I can jump to my bottom line all the way down at the bottom here. So I'm going to basically jump to this edge, all the way up, and then sew through all of the pleats again, like we did before. There we are, so I've kind of anchored it once, and then I'm going to go back and do it again to kind of secure it and push it down further. And just make sure it's tightly secured. Then once I've got the end done, I'm going to move back up through my other pins and make tiny stitches until I'm back up top. I'm going to remove that pin because I know where it is. And, yeah, gonna make a tiny stitch here. And that is what we're left with. Our ribbon is firmly anchored onto our backing, and our threads look pretty okay. Nothing too messy yet. Next time I'm going to go over basics of bead embroidery and how we're going to start filling this part out. I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial, and I shall see you in the next part.